Okay, we're going to get going here real soon. Thanks for coming out. I know the parking was a little bit of a challenge. We didn't realize that there was going to be so many pre-parking people in the parking lot. So welcome, everybody. I'm Grace with the Grace Frank Group. Is that better? Okay. We are launching our new program called Lunch and Learn with Grace Frank Group. It'll be a series that we do every quarter. We're going to have it here at the Grand Falloon. It's a great place to have it. Lovely lunch. Generally, there's good parking. It just kind of was a fluky day. He said next time he'll make sure he'll have a parking attendee to kind of have the people that aren't supposed to be here not be parking here. But it is a nice parking lot. So we are so excited about today. We have two kind of segments. The first segment is on cost segregation. And we have Micah and Michael. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they know a lot more about themselves than I do. So, and then the second phase is going to be about financing for investments and business opportunities. There's some great opportunities that are available for as little as 10% down, which makes a project a lot more accessible. So we're very excited because this is just come back on target for cost segregation, and it works across the board for a lot of different opportunities for business owners and investors and developers. So with no further ado, Micah and Michael, here you go.
Thank you, Grace, and thanks for having us today. Beautiful venue. We're happy to be part of the series. And thanks to everyone in the audience and everyone attending virtually as well. So Mike and I will be presenting on cost segregation and a couple other topics as well, real estate related. We'd like it to be interactive. If you guys have questions throughout, feel free to yell at us. You might have to yell a little loud with our headphones on, raise your hand, do whatever you need to get our attention. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions too. I'll introduce myself and then I'll pass it off to Mike and he'll introduce himself and get into the fun stuff. I'm Micah Greenberger. I'm a partner at Wyndham Brannon. We're a regional CPA firm headquartered in Atlanta. We have a Chattanooga office on Chestnut Street about a mile away from here as well. We're full service tax audit advisory. Our clients are nationwide. We have lots of foreign clients as well. And I personally lead our real estate practice. And so I think what we focus on with our real estate practice are a lot of things like this where it's, value-added tax planning ideas. I like to say that anyone can prepare a tax return, although I've learned in my 13 years at Wyndham Brannon that that's definitely not true. So we'll focus on things, front-end structuring, operating agreement review, things that are super important in the tax world that people tend to forget to include their CPA in those discussions. And then dispositions and, ultimately like individual owner planning on the back end as well. I'll pass it off to Mike to introduce himself.
No, thank you, Micah. And I'm Mike Hammel with McGuire Sponsel, and I'll give you guys a quick snapshot of us and how we work alongside. So we've had a relationship with Wyndham Brannon for a long time, and our work is mainly done through CPA firms. And so we work alongside CPA firms with specialty tax issues or circumstances or anything that pops up. So I'm a shareholder, run our Atlanta practice. Our office is near the Battery, but as a firm, which we'll have in the slide deck of things to talk about and more about us, but we're in Indianapolis, Atlanta, Dallas, Phoenix, and Detroit. But our role in this is to help support companies that are investing in real estate. So we have a large real estate practice that talks through cost segregation, 179D, property tax appeal work, and so the various value adds that on top of what Micah and CPA firms do, some of the specialty work that enhances cash flow so that way owners can go back and reinvest in properties, find new ways to maybe go acquire new assets, whatever that situation might be. So that's our fixed asset practice, which we'll talk about in detail and what that exactly means when we say fixed assets. But we have work that's, like R&D tax credit work, international tax. So we work in a variety of ways with various CPA firms. But for today, I would say the purpose mainly focuses in on a lot of the real estate specific activities that you guys would be experiencing.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think the first couple slides are intro slides, which we kind of just went through. So
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to add on this, guys. I think, like I said, our role in this is to support as you guys go, because when you start looking through, anytime you guys get into a deal or you get into a new project or some type of event on a transaction, I would say we're one piece of that. CPA firm and the broker and a part of that are also a part of that equation, to where when we come in and add value and bring some type of, say, tax planning item, we want to make sure that A, you guys qualify, but B, you can utilize it. So it might make sure that the deduction matches up with the year that you might be adding an asset, building a building, whatever that might be. And I know we touched all about this. This will go, you can continue going. It'll go through all the practice lines. But I don't know if you want to add anything about Wyndham Brannon, or if we should just kind of launch right into this.
yeah, let's go into it. I think you guys have heard enough about us. We'll get to the fun stuff.
So agenda, just quickly, guys. I think, like I said, I think we'll start with what do we mean by fixed assets, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what is a cost segregation study. As Micah said, interactive, guys. We don't want to be talking at you. You guys can talk with us. So if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to chime in and ask those along the way. You're not going to offend us by stopping us at a point in time during the presentation. Talk about some of the changes, right? So tax laws changed a lot over the last couple of years. We had the one big beautiful bill that came through, so we'll talk about some of the impacts there. Not only on cost segregation, but some of the things that Micah's talking about with like 1031s and some of the interaction points there, and then wrap up with some of the property tax issues that we're seeing right now. I'm sure you guys are seeing it too, right, with some of the assessed values going through the roof across the country, and just kind of how to combat those. So moving into what I would call what is our fixed asset practice. So the next slide talks a lot about those components when we start talking through the fixed asset practice. And so there's really, I would say, about 4 things that make up our fixed asset practice. One is cost segregation study, which we'll talk about. The second in this case was anything like fixed asset management related, which we don't need to get into detail on what that is, but it's really just maintaining depreciation schedules, making sure people are maximizing and monitoring their cash flow, I would say, when you're getting rid of assets, adding new assets, how that kind of works alongside CPA firms. And then 179D and 45L, we'll spend a little bit time talking about that. That is mainly an energy efficiency added deduction on top of a cost segregation study. So we have a slide that talks more about that, but to be honest with you guys, this area is going to change drastically and go away because of the one big beautiful bill. It actually terminates in 2026. And so this is something that I would say focus more on what I would say cost segregation and property tax appeal, but you have a limited window to take advantage of 179D and 45L, which we'll talk more about as we go throughout the presentation. So I think first thing, guys, when we start talking about, I guess I'm going to pose a question right now. How many of the people here, I know it's hard to do virtually, are aware or have experienced a cost segregation study? Okay, so some people have experience in it. So I think as we kind of go through what a cost segregation study, this kind of takes a step back from a 30,000-foot view and says, looking at a cost segregation study, it's really all about cash flow. It's how are we going to identify components in a building, whether you buy it, you build it, or you're renovating an asset, and working through to figure out what of those components can then be in a different life to help you guys offset tax bills that year, or does it make sense to wait? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the timing here, but if we go to the next slide, it talks about these 3 pieces that are highlighted, how a cost segregation study is a tool, right? We're trying to optimize depreciation, optimize deductions along the way. And so when you look at a cost segregation study, it's all about how can we affect the taxable income that year for the owners involved in the project. And maybe it makes sense to wait a year. Maybe there's projecting more income next year, and we can kind of walk through what that looks like. So it's all about maximizing personal property. So when you look at a cost segregation study, commercial buildings are depreciated over 39 years, residential's over 27 and a half. So what in that 39-year bucket can we move to a 15-year land improvement to speed up a deduction? So anything on the outside of a building, anything that's on the inside in a 7 or 5-year bucket, we can pull out of 39 years into a 7 or 5 year. You look at things like carpet, electrical work, all of that type of work, instead of depreciating it over 39 or 27 and a half, because sometimes in those events you might not own the building for that long. And so we're trying to move them now to increase cash flow to offset tax bills the year that you buy it or the year that you place it in service. And so that's the power in doing a cost segregation study, is really wiping out your tax bills that would be generated that year. And so that's what the depreciation side of this talks about a little bit. And I'd say the second point, and we were having a conversation about this with Grace, is, I would say a rule of thumb is when you buy a building or build a building, whatever that total basis is for that year, you could expect about 15 to 20% of that, especially in today's climate with 100% bonus depreciation, to be written off in year one. So it is powerful when you start looking at the numbers and looking at what that looks like, but there are layers to this to have a conversation about whether it makes sense on the tax side. So overall, when you look at, maybe you buy a building for, let's say $1 million of an office building or whatever the number might be, you can expect about $150,000 to $200,000 of a deduction. Cash flow would go based off the tax rate. And so if, say, it's a $200,000 deduction at a 30% tax rate, right, you're saving about $60,000 of actual tax that year. Those numbers obviously can multiply out when you look at the basis of a building or the type of asset that looks like. And so property-wise, when they go through this, like I said, depreciate over 39 years or 27 and a half years. Go ahead. Yep, great question. And so we'll get into a lot of that because it depends on the asset, is what I would tell you, or the structure of the deal. And so the question is that active income that could be offset or only capital gains in those situations? And so there's two situations, and Micah can jump in on this as well. Is we talk about this in the presentation. The answer in a situation such as that, if you're a real estate professional, qualified real estate professional, it's your active income in that case. But if it was a W-2 earner, let's say, and it's their first investment rental and their first property, we have passive activity rules that we have to talk about. So if there's not any passive income being generated for that individual that year, you're getting tripped up to where you might not be able to take this deduction until the second or third year, until that property generates enough rental income of passive income to offset that year. So for your answer, it depends on the structure, depends on the transaction, depends on the deal. But if they're a qualified real estate professional, offsets active income.
A lot of the answers to questions, especially in the tax world, tend to be it depends. So the IRS has rules on this real estate professional. The official terminology is materially participating real estate professional. The main requirement that you have to meet is that you're hitting 750 hours or more a year of qualified real estate activities. And the IRS is really just trying to make sure, like, this is what you do, this is your job. It's not a side gig. And that's the only way to make, rental real estate or any real estate activity and losses deductible, because you're considered non-passive instead of passive.
Mm-hmm. I think the next slide kind of talks about some of the things that we were just going over. I don't know if you want to unpack any things a little more.
Yeah, so, obviously with One Big Beautiful Bill Act, 100% bonus depreciation going forward, I think that cost segs, they've always been a huge planning tool, but in the right situation can be even more of a planning tool going forward. It's really, it's a play in a couple ways. One is time value of money. So I think Mike maybe mentioned, or we were talking earlier, if you're going to flip something in a year, a cost seg might not always make sense because there's no time value of money play there. And then the play on tax rates, when you're getting these deductions, when you're taking 100% bonus or depreciation expense, you're deducting that at ordinary tax rate. So top tax rate is 37%. And then when you sell something, you're being taxed some at ordinary from recapture, some at 25%. And then the appreciation on the asset is at capital gains rates, which is usually 20% is the top tax rate there. And so you want to make sure, Mike and his team, they handle the study, but you got to make sure with your CPA, does this make sense? So am I going to be able to utilize these losses? And then two, it needs to be implemented the right way. So you're filing an additional form. You have additional calculations on the tax return. So you need to make sure that your CPA is knowledgeable and doing that. And we've worked with Mike on plenty of these. And so, one example I gave of when a cost seg might not make sense is, a quick flip. And another one is, because you can always go back, let's do a study, and then you don't have to amend. You can just adjust it going forward. But if the asset is 30 years old already and everything's already been fully depreciated, that's another situation where it probably doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where this slide, I would tell you, if you're looking at something today, it's probably a good snapshot of things to look at, because when you're buying a building, renovating a building, or building a building, those are kind of your triggers. I always tell people when we're working with CPA firms with specific clients, it's do you owe tax, and are you acquiring real estate? Those are really the two pieces. And then you have layers to that, like what Micah's talking about, of what the intent of the building is, what you truly want to do with that asset. Those things come to light when you have those planning conversations. But at its core, it's, are you building, are you buying, are you renovating? Are you doing that in excess of probably about $500,000 of depreciable basis, backing land out? And if you're doing that, these are some of, I would say, the asset classes that we've had a lot of experience seeing. I mean, you look at the market today, or over the last, say, 5 years, mixed use has been around. You see multifamily a lot popping up, office spaces, retail. It's really, do you own real estate? Do you owe tax? Let's have the conversation about whether it makes sense. And to Micah's point, it's not only the year that you place it in service, the year that you buy the asset. You might have bought, say, a retail building 2 years ago, and it's sitting in 39 year 2 years ago. We don't have to file an amended return to go back and capture that benefit. It's that Form 3115 he's talking about to get the catch-up in depreciation the year you file your return. And so it's most, I would say, the misconception with cost segregation studies sometimes is you have to do it the year that you buy or build a building. That's not the case. And so it really, truly can be a planning item to plan it out. So if maybe you have 3 other buildings that you sold that year, or you're getting ready to sell next year, so you're obviously you're gonna have some event happening down the road where you're having more income that year. If you have other assets, let's do those studies and match that up for that year that you have that transaction to lower those tax bills. So bonus depreciation's changed under 2 areas. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had a phase out of 20%. So it was 100% in 22, went down 20% to 80 in 23, 24 was 60, and then a part of 25, which we'll talk about, was 40. Now it's at 100% bonus. So that the One Big Beautiful Bill has permanent 100% bonus depreciation available for assets after the end of January. It's like January 20th is the cutoff date. And we'll talk about this a little bit more on what that looks like. But as of today, buildings are eligible for 100% bonus depreciation. And so bonus depreciation has changed. But if you have buildings, let's say you bought one 3 years ago, okay, so now we're stuck in 2022 timeframe. It goes based on when the building's placed in service on the ability to take bonus. It's not the year you do a study. So let's say, in that example, let's say 2023 where it's 80%. You buy a building, you place it in service in 23, but you want to do a study in 25 or 26 on that building. You're not eligible for 100% bonus because you're doing a study in 25, 26. You're only eligible for when you bought it and placed it in service.
And oftentimes there's still significant value. Even if you're in the 60% year in 2024, there's still significant value. And especially like in the last slide where it said the target industries, if you're in real estate and that's what you do, people are thinking about this stuff. But if you're in auto dealers or medical offices or marinas, like people tend to not think about things like this, and it can be a very valuable planning tool. Did you have a question? It's when you place it in service. Mm-hmm. So when you start depreciating it on your tax return. So if you buy it at the end of 2021, but you're not starting depreciation until 2022, you're going to look and say, what are the depreciation rules in 2022? That's what bonus percentage you'll be eligible for. But even if you do it now, next year on your 2025 tax return, you can still file this form, say, here's what my depreciation would have been if I did this originally in 2022. You come up with this adjustment, which will always be favorable, a negative adjustment, and then you can take it all in that 1 year, and that gets passed out to the... Yes,
100%.
without amending tax returns. No, so it's 100% permanently.
Yep.
Until some other bill comes out and
Until some other
overrides.
tax overhaul comes
Yeah.
about. But that's what's awesome with the one big beautiful bill right now is, if you think about what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was phasing out 20% year over year, you think now for new construction assets that might be on right now, there's an incentive at that time to get it done by year end and place it in service by year end, because you're losing out. If you were going to place it in service by 12/31, but the asset's not going to be completed till, say, January of something, then at that time, you're losing 20% just based on maybe construction delays and things like that. So obviously some of those were out of your control at that point in time, but now there's certainty in planning around bonus specifically. And so, there's other tax provisions that come into play for other situations where people elect out of bonus. And I know that gets into more, I would say, the technical side on the tax side, but it depends on the structure of the deal, right? You might have some various LP funds or some type of investor pool that comes together. Mm-hmm. It changes the structure on whether you want to take bonus or not in those situations. And so we start with just knowing the transaction, what information to pull, put numbers to the concept, confirm that utilization piece, because the last thing you want to do is do something and you have no benefit. So that's the biggest thing when you start talking about having a strategy conversation. Mm-hmm. So we can talk through this briefly. I'd tell you this was an auto dealership. Again, it was acquired in 23. So bonus depreciation, we're looking at 80%. So this was acquired for $8 million. If you look at the second to last bullet point here, when we go in and do a study, since it's an acquisition, we typically pull like a closing statement and an appraisal. So we're trying to get our depreciable basis amount, get to a land amount, so that way we can reduce the land amount that year, and then look at, say, that $8 million and how much of that $8 million can we move into personal property, which that personal property would be eligible for 80% bonus depreciation that year. So we were able to move about 30% of that $8 million into a 5 and 15-year bucket, which increased cash flow in year one because of bonus of about $380,000. Okay, so that right there is not the deduction amount. That would be the cash essentially for that year to offset the taxes owed for the structure or whatever the ownership group is of this project. And so that's the power when you look at a cost segregation study and bonus, because there are situations sometimes where you don't bonus everything out. You might bonus only one of the assets out or one of the lives out in situations. And that's where the utilization of those deductions based on the structure of the deal is so crucial when you start working through these. And then cost seg strategies, guys, I know we've touched on a lot of these, and the next slide, again, talks about what we're talking about here with some of these questions is you don't have to do it the year that it's placed in service. There's planning opportunities around certain situations. And I know Micah will be talking through what we call qualified improvement property, which is really, really important when you start talking about any type of like renovations. And so I don't want to steal his thunder when we start talking about this section over here, because QIP can be really, really critical for any type of asset that's being renovated. And so I think it probably makes sense just to go to the next slide, because we've touched on a lot of this stuff. Because that stuff, I thought it was next. Maybe I'm wrong.
I can jump into QIP.
Yeah, because I thought it's coming up. Come on the next one, because we talked a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So qualified improvement property, QIP, what Mike just mentioned. So it's referring to, it's non-residential, so, commercial real estate. And after you place a building in service, it's interior improvements. And up here, there's a couple examples, drywall, drop ceilings, HVAC. Those are examples. And then there are a few things that are specifically excluded in the IRS regs. And so if you guys are familiar with before Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this used to be the confusing, like, 3 categories. There's qualified leasehold improvement property, qualified restaurant property, qualified retail property. So the Tax Cuts and Job Act simplified that and just said, we're just going to call it qualified improvement property. And if you want to go to the next slide. So where this can come into play, and I've been seeing it a lot more recently, are short-term rentals. We've been seeing this a lot more with our client base in the real estate world, where people have a vacation home or they have an Airbnb, and, you know, they're just trying to have a little side hustle to make some money. And so the IRS has come out with these rules where if your average stay is less than 30 days and you're not offering substantial services, they'll classify the property as non-residential. And so, you know, in your head, you're like, oh, well, that stinks, because residential, 27 and a half years on the building, non-residential is 39-year depreciable life. So something that seems like it couldn't be great can be great, because if you have these QIP renovations, which are only for non-residential properties, those are 15 years, and now all of a sudden you're able to take 100% bonus depreciation on those. So that can be super helpful there, and an area where Mike and his team could come in a cost seg and be able to pull out all the 15-year stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say this is a very powerful area when you look at retail, office. Like, this is where the whole TIs and tenant improvement stuff starts coming into play, where you might have someone develop just a site and shell of a building, and then you have all of these TIs to all of these buildings that are coming in. Or to your point, you know, residential, like here, think about like the 30A stretch. For being close to here, you have the whole 30A stretch of the Panhandle of Florida. Well, Airbnb, VRBO, this all comes into play. You know, there's short-term rentals, so they're deemed like hotels, like 39-year assets. So you might buy one, say in 22, and then now 3-4 years from now, you're like, I'm gonna renovate the kitchen, I'm gonna renovate the interior of the structure. I'm really not gonna touch anything on the exterior of the building envelope and anything like that. You really, in some cases, you might not need a cost segregation study because of this tax provision, because you could just bonus it out as qualified improvement property. It's automatically a 15-year life, 100% bonus eligible, considering that you would have done it, say, in 25, 26, 27, whatever that window is of bonus depreciation right now, as it's permanent at 100%. So these are, again, it's kind of an added value on top of a cost seg study, whether it's needed or not. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of, this is really, really crucial, because it just increases, again, cash flow. But to Micah's point, if it changes, right, and it's a 27.5-year asset, you can't take QIP on residential assets. It has to be commercial.
And I think those are just some of the advantages. Mike and I have gone over those already.
Yeah, and so depreciation provisions, we've talked a little bit already about this. It's really just kind of giving a timeline or a snapshot of bonus depreciation. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came out, and there's 2 areas. So qualified improvement property came about, like we just talked about, and they expanded some of that. The other part that I think is overlooked with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is used property became eligible for a cost segregation study. So if you were acquiring assets, now you can take a cost seg study and take bonus on that. Whereas it used to only be on new construction assets. And so that was a huge change in the real estate community with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The next one is what we talked about with bonus depreciation. You know, getting it to be at 100%, then it phased down, and now we're in a good spot around bonus depreciation at 100%. But I will talk a little bit on the next slide about some of the changes that happened there. And then in Micah's world too is the interplay of 179 and the ability to expense. Those phase outs and those limitations have expanded over time. And I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Just because most of my client base is real estate, we don't see 179 a ton, because usually real estate is you're going to have taxable losses until you sell something. And so 179, you can't create or increase loss with that, but bonus depreciation you can. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's where big benefit now that you can, as of 2017, have used property eligible for bonus depreciation, and these cost segs can really come into play and be super valuable and save you some cash.
And so this is, again, talking through bonus depreciation, but the second point is where you might have an asset, especially new construction, that started, say, in 24, okay, and it goes on throughout 24 under the depreciation rules that year, and then it sprinkles into 25, and say it's completed and placed in service Q1 of 25, okay? But there's a January 20th cutoff. So as opposed to it going to placed in service date for 100% bonus depreciation, it goes based on the binding contract date. So we saw that with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act when there's these transitional years that happen. And so, for example, in a situation, you might have like carpet going in a situation where, you know, it goes in January before January 20th cutoff. Well, that might be eligible. That's going to be eligible for 40% as opposed to 100% if it goes in after that January 20th date. So there are situations where you might be building a building right now that some of those assets are eligible for 40%, and some of the you could have 60%, 40%, and 100% on that same building. Yep. And so that's a good question. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but the in-service date is definitely important. But for this specific change, when you have any type of tax bill that comes in, like Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did this in 17, where there's this transitional year where buildings that are already still on, we always go based on placed in service date traditionally, but with a tax bill like the One Big Beautiful Bill, it's specific for assets that fall in this time frame of like 24, 25 that are going to be placed in service in 25. So most people think that it would be eligible for 100% that year, but in this case it goes based off the binding contract date, so you have to look at the construction agreement, you have to look at the draws and the pay applications on what theoretically was in service for that year. So this is a change, but traditionally you would think it would depend on the contract. If the money was hard at the time that you had the when you closed on it and you bought that property, probably going to most likely be eligible for 40% in that case. But we would have to look at the agreements and what that looks like if the money was hard at that time. Acquisitions are a lot easier because if it's after that January 20th date, you're fine, right? It's going to be eligible for 100% bonus. We traditionally see it more on new construction assets because you're going to have something in 24 that's, say, 60%. Then you have this little period in January of 25, basically 3 weeks, that could be eligible for 40 and then 100%. So acquisitions, if the money was hard at the time before of January 20th, say it was hard at January 10th, depending on the agreement, you're probably going to be eligible for 40% in that case, even if you place it in service, say after that January 20th date.
I think the IRS just knows that if they don't make a rule like this on these development deals, that they won't see any assets placed in service between January 1st and January 19th on tax returns.
Yeah. It's definitely a game, right? Yeah, that's where I think in the situation where those come up, it's look through all the agreements, look through all of the documents that have been signed on there to see if there's a way to, obviously there's a huge change from 40 to 100. And so you obviously want to get 100% in those cases. So is there an area in the agreement that we could agree on that we're comfortable with? Because last thing you want to do is take a position like that and it does get questioned, and then you don't really have anywhere to like stand on it if it ever became an audit situation. So this could potentially be an audit position, but guys, we're in a government shutdown right now. Like we start talking about all those situations that come up. A question too that you guys might ask is, you know, what's the audit situation look like on a cost seg study? If I'm being real with you guys, it's pretty low, but you don't want to take tax advice and do those type of things based on, it's a small chance that I'm going to get audited, right? It's mainly, I think this could be an area that comes up in the future. But right now, it's land value is probably the biggest one that gets audited, as opposed to just putting a percentage amount in as a land value. They want to see an appraisal. The IRS wants to see some type of allocation from building to land through the local tax assessor, or the other situation's QIP, because it's such a big write-off that can happen in that year. So they want to see what is truly 1250, so real property, and what's 1245 on the personal property side, because some of a renovation is probably touching the structure of the building. And so we want to make sure that you spend $1 million on a renovation, let's say, well, maybe 98% of it's eligible for QIP and the other 2% is not, right? So they want to make sure that there's some type of documentation detail that basically splits those out.
Okay, so this is new with One Big Beautiful Bill, and I think this could add to the list of there's some possible IRS exposure out there when you're taking advantage of this. So qualified production property, if you have it, it has a 39-year depreciable life, and they put strict requirements around this, and it's for this reason. The building itself is eligible for 100% bonus depreciation. And so there are some dates up there, and in number 3 right there. But I mean, the main rules are you can't be leasing it. So the owner of the building has to be the ones that are occupying the building and using the building for manufacturing activities. And then only the manufacturing and production areas of the facility will be eligible for it. So if there's an R&D area or offices or break room, bathroom, whatever, things like that, those won't be eligible. And this is another situation where if we know we have this, something that you probably don't need a cost seg on. If you're going to take 100% on it and you're comfortable with these are the areas I know that are manufacturing and production related, then that's a massive benefit.
And then I'm going to, for sake of time, guys, I'm going to be quick with the 179D 45L stuff. It is expiring, like I said, in 26. Really what it is it's an additional deduction for 179D on top of a cost seg study, only for new construction assets. Nothing related to any acquisitions or along the way. It has to be for commercial buildings, and it has to be for new construction assets. And so if you're improving the energy efficiency of the building with the building envelope, the lighting, and the HVAC, those 3 components of a building, you could be entitled to an additional deduction based on the square footage. And so right now it's based at $1. But if you hear about like prevailing wages and apprenticeship programs on projects that are new construction, if that's the case, you could potentially be eligible for $5 a square foot if those are present in that construction process. So it does change the nature of what that deduction looks like. So that's 179D. Again, that's a deduction. 45L is an actual tax credit, okay? And so 45L, it's going away in 26. Basically, it's for residential real estate, new construction again. So think home builders, apartment complexes. It used to be where you'd get about a $2,000 tax credit per unit built, but then they phased it down. The IRS changed some of the language in this to where it's probably more along the lines of about $500 per unit. And so if you look at a 100 unit apartment complex, the credit amount can get pretty far up there, but they've made it harder to get the qualifications on the energy efficiency side. And again, just moving forward, it's going away right now, but if there's specific questions on this, we can talk about it too separately.
Okay, so I'll go through kind of the interplay of 1031s with cost segs. And then I think that's the end of our cost seg. Mike will talk a little bit about the property tax issues, and then before we pass it off to our banker friends that are over here. So 1031s are always a hot topic. I feel like anytime there's a new tax bill, one side is always trying to do away with 1031s. In Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, they got rid of being able to do 1031s with personal property, so now it's just real property. And so the interplay with the cost seg is if you do a 1031, you're deferring your gain, you're taking all the proceeds from a sale, investing them in a new property. If you invest an additional amount into a new property, so if you sell a property for $5 million, but then you put $10 million into a new property, that extra $5 million is additional basis, and you're eligible to take bonus depreciation on that. And that's where a cost seg study could be valuable. And so there are a couple of ways when you're doing a 1031 of depreciating. One is really the way that I just explained, where you're continuing to depreciating old basis, and then you have this new excess basis, and you can take bonus depreciation on that. The other way is more complex, and there's more IRS exposure typically, where you're taking new basis. So you're saying, here's the undepreciated amount. I'm going to start over my depreciation on this. And then you depreciate that way. But then if you do it that way, everything's eligible for bonus depreciation. And so there's an election required with that, and there tends to be more depreciation recapture, so we don't see that as much, but that's always an option. And I think that when people hear cost seg and 1031 in the same sentence, they get excited. So we get questions about this a lot.
They definitely get excited, and that's where, like, on our side, our ears perk up too, because there's more complexities to it, right, when you look at it. Because last thing you want to do is trigger, in our world, a concept called boot by doing something. And so there's layers to everything that we talk about when it comes to this. But if there is something where you're looking at a cost segregation study with a 1031, you take some added steps to make sure you do due diligence to say, here's what the benefit is. We have clear direction on what that looks like. And so, but there is absolutely value. We've done a lot of cost segregation studies on 1031s. You just have to make sure that each transaction makes sense. And then lastly, when we get into the last concept, is property taxes, guys. This is, I would tell you, when you look at properties you own and those situations, obviously you guys are trying to control property taxes and insurance. Those are kind of, I would say, the top two items. When you look at that, they're very, very, very costly. But, you know, various areas, what we've seen across the country, are just coming in what we feel like with a dart and throwing it at the dartboard saying, here's what I'm going to assess your property at, right? And you might see a 10, 15, 20, if not higher % increase along the way. And so taking a step back and saying, okay, what kind of property is it? Maybe we had COVID issues at the time that they're doing an assessment. If it's an office building, so vacancy was an issue. There's always a story when you start talking about a property tax appeal. So there's really two routes I would tell you that you can go and kind of appeal your property taxes. You always get a notice that comes in with a set time frame to go in and appeal it. We could go through the informal route, which would be that, or a formal route. The informal route is really building a case around, okay, do I have the income approach, the cost approach, or the market approach, which the next slide talks a little bit about those three approaches depending upon the asset, to sit there and say, okay, can we build a narrative saying that this building should be more at this assessed value, not this assessed value, to reduce your property tax bills for those years. And so I'll tell you, if you're paying more than $50,000 in property taxes on an annual basis, it may make sense to look at those properties. All of this stuff is public record, to sit there and say, you know what, it's fairly assessed, it's over-assessed, here's what it's over-assessed by, and here's what the process looks to go back and see if we can capture some savings. If it's under-assessed, don't touch it, right? Let it lay, which is not usual in today's market, in today's world right now. But this is a very powerful way to try and get some cash back, right, based on your property taxes. And depending upon where the property's at across the country, some of these can be savings that's really set in stone for 3 years, 5 years, because they're considered like cycle states. So I know North Carolina is that way, and some of the other states across the country are that way. But this is definitely a very powerful way to build a case of saying, look, I don't know where you're going with my property taxes at the assessor. And it's like, how are you coming up with this value? And then if we can come in and reduce that value by a specific tax rate for that local area, there's instant savings in that process. And so again, it's just a value add on top of a cost segregation study, a 179D study, whatever that situation might be. It's really just cash back so you guys can go reinvest.
And when they're in there already doing one of these studies, I think a lot of times you might say, hey, this number looks high.
Yeah.
Let us take a look at it for you.
Again, since it's all public record, it's really easy to kind of see where the property taxes are falling. And based on doing a cost segregation study and performing that, you can see kind of, if it's an office building and you go and do a site visit, because that's part of the process in a cost seg study, is, you know, there's vacancy throughout the spaces. It's not fully occupied, but they're valuing it based maybe on the income approach of it being fully occupied. And so if we can pull some P&Ls and pull some information and say, you know what, it's not fully occupied, you're valuing it here when it realistically should be here. Now, it's more of a negotiation to figure out where you go on the informal appeal. The formal appeal, if you don't hit it within that window, it's okay of getting the assessment filed. The formal appeal is you just have to go to a board hearing and present the case and then go through more of the formal approach at the specific county level. But as to Micah's point, yeah, we look at those as kind of full circle. And if it makes sense, here's what it looks like. If it doesn't make sense, right, we'll be honest and say, you know what, not worth the time and effort to file an appeal. It's fairly assessed at where it's at.
I think that was it. So if I know we've been asking questions throughout, and we appreciate that. If anyone else has questions, we're happy to answer them now. Or for the folks that are here, Mike and I have left cards out front. I think, yeah. So here's our information. If the folks online want to screenshot it, feel free to reach out to either of us. And if you reach out to the wrong one, we'll tell you that the other one is the one that can answer your question. But thanks again for having us, Grace, and thanks for listening to us.
Thank you. So we have another segment on finance. You guys did a great job. Thank you. So they're from the Atlanta area, but they are, very accessible. They have an office here. Micah has an office here in Chattanooga, and they practice all over the United States. So they do practice for the United States. So if you have property in different states, that's just, an amazing opportunity. So thank you guys so much. So now it's time to get some amazing crepes. They should be really, really good. So we now have Brightbridge Capital. They're going to tell you all about what they do. They are a not-for-profit. It's an amazing opportunity for you guys to work with them. They work with local lenders. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but Brightbridge Capital.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you all for attending today. Gary Moore with Brightbridge Capital, Preston Way with Brightbridge Capital. And I'd like to begin by telling you who we are and what we do. But before I do that, show of hands, how many of you either own commercial property or are looking to buy commercial property? Okay. Anyone have a commercial property that you are looking to lease out at the moment? Okay, good. As we go along, I think some of the programs that we have might be beneficial to you depending on the uses of proceeds and how you intend to use those properties. And feel free to ask those questions at any time as we go through the conversation here. Brightbridge here in Chattanooga, and our focus is on providing capital, debt, loans to for-profit businesses, some other programs that we offered. So, for example, we did grant acquisition and program management for municipalities. And I mention that because if any of you remember the Cavalier Corporation, which was located next to the National Cemetery, they made vending machines for Coke. That's what they did. After that business closed and left, buildings were removed on that property, and it was discovered that there was a lot of contamination there. And so the city of Chattanooga contracted with us to manage the abatement of that contamination through the use of state and federal grants. So that used to be a part of what we did. We no longer do that. And the reason for that is what we've learned over time is that most of our work and most of the demand for what we do is to help provide capital to small businesses and nonprofit agencies and to affordable housing. So we've restructured our agency so that now that's our main focus, and that is what we do. We do this through SBA programs, primarily the 504 program, which Preston will talk about in just a moment. And also we offer some other programs that allow us to fund a project directly and in cooperation with a bank. So I'll stop there, and Preston can tell you a little more about those programs and how they work.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So with the SBA product, the 504, it's really a fixed asset vehicle. Fixed assets being real estate, building acquisition. We can even finance equipment, leasehold improvements. Anything really tied to a fixed asset is eligible. Really the only thing that the 504, other than the fixed assets, that it cannot finance would be working capital, which we have a separate product for that where we can do like a companion loan with the 504. But the 504 is extremely attractive to a business owner because if you've been in business 2 years or longer, you're eligible to put only 10% down, which is very low compared to conventional financing. If you are a startup, which we do work with startups, you're looking at a 15% down payment, And what's awesome is we can stretch it all the way to a 25-year amortization, which is also pretty long compared to a conventional loan through a bank. Some other great things about the 504 is it also is a fixed rate throughout the life of the loan. So on that 25-year AM, you're locked in at a fixed rate for 25 years. And I know the debenture changes each month, Gary, but isn't it right around 5.9%? It's for October at least.
It's below prime, yes.
So it's below prime. Prime just came down to 7. So we're expecting that SBA rate to also probably work its way down as well. But upper 5s is kind of where it sits today, and it's a great tool for business owners to be able to help with their cash flow and not have to have so much cash at the closing table.
We did not prepare slides, or rather I did not prepare slides, so I apologize for that. But the best way to illustrate what Preston just described, the 504 program, is to use a pie, the old ubiquitous pie chart. The bank that's involved, and there does have to be a bank or credit union, they will do 50% of the project. So they're in first position on the project at 50%. That makes it very attractive to them. And then we represent the SBA's portion at 40%. And then the borrower, as Preston described, if they are not a startup and it's not considered a special use property, they're in at 10%. So the borrower is paying 2 loans. They're paying the bank loan and the SBA portion, but it's a blended rate. The bank rate is at whatever they negotiate with the purchaser. The SBA rate, as Preston mentioned, is below market. So that's a blended rate that they pay, but that 40% is fixed for 25 years. So that helps with cash in and cash flow throughout the term of the loan, and especially if it's a newer business, it allows them a period of time to stabilize because they have more cash on hand going into the project.
Yeah, and to Gary's point, banks, we do partner with banks, and they're our biggest referral source. So this is something that we like to tell potential clients to go talk to your bank partner about the SBA product and bring us all to the table, as we do not want to compete with our bank partners. Now, the CDFI program, which is now being termed Bridge to Bankable, it's a loan product we offer through our CDFI fund, and it has a bit more flexibility for us, and where we're able to there's really no skeleton, as you will. We can kind of create the terms based on the borrower and what the project can support. And in that loan product, we work with a lot of nonprofits, startups, as we mentioned, but we also, that's a tool where we're able to do affordable housing in that space as well. And that loan product is typically well below prime. When I say well below, it can vary. We've lended at prime -3. We've also lent at prime -1, but it's generally under prime. And the main goal with that is it's in the name, Bridge to Bankable. We want to essentially provide debt to a business owner that allows them to kind of generate that cash flow and stabilize the project to where in a few years they're able to go to that bank partner and potentially do a conventional loan through them. So we're kind of that gap filler, as you will, in the market, and that's kind of how that works.
Right. It doesn't hurt our feelings when they leave us, because that's the way we're designed to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the CDFI? Yes, so it can vary. Like I said, it's no cold and hard, fast rule like the SBA. Generally, it's 90% loan to value or 10% down. Now, if you were a startup, we may ask for more, but it's really project by project. We would look at your business plan, which is a key to both the SBA product and the CDFI, and that would kind of be your application to kind of tell us your story, and if your repayment ability, kind of eligible cost, all that good stuff. So I'll let you answer that.
It depends. For our SBA programs, we cover all of Tennessee. We can go into some surrounding states under some circumstances, but under our other programs, our other toolbox, if you will, we do work in the Southeast, and one of those programs in particular, it's a tax credit program. We can go anywhere in the United States. We can go to Alaska if we want to. We're not, but we do have that flexibility. Jumping back to the SBA side of things for just a moment, this 504 program, it's ideal for purchasing a building or long-term equipment and or both. But you must be a for-profit business, and if you're buying the business, a building or constructing a building for that matter, you must occupy a majority of it. And there is currently now more favorable treatment to manufacturers. The SBA portion of the loan, SBA has waived its fees for manufacturers at this point. So that's a big help to them. So for that 504 program, again, ideal for buying a building, constructing a building, or maybe you own a building and you have a manufacturer that leases it from you and they need to expand their production capacity. They can use this to purchase long-term equipment, which means they're going to stay in your building longer. They don't have to go look for a new space. But for-profit businesses only. But on the other programs, through this Bridge to Bankable program that Preston described, we do have a little more leeway. For example, we could, if there's a church that sponsors or hosts a preschool program within its building, we wouldn't be able to work with them under the SBA program, but we can work with faith-based programs and projects under our Bridge to Bankable program.
Yeah, and something else that I would like to add, Gary, is you can also do refinance under the 504. So maybe you've gone through a conventional loan with a bank in the last year, 2, 3 years, and you have a high rate. That's where we can look at it if it's refinancing eligible fixed assets in the 504 as well. So just something to think about. Yeah, so we would need the 10% wouldn't change even if there is a seller note component. We would still ask for that borrower to bring 10% to the table. And with SBA, if I had the SOP in front of me, I could better answer your question. But there are some, we'd have to go through the process and there'd be specific steps to take. But that 10% down does not change in that example.
Yeah, seller financing can be a part of the overall financing. But it does have to be on standby for the life of the SBA loan. That's agreeable to some folks, and to others it's not.
Most of the time it's a deal breaker, or does it make sense? Yes.
Oh yes.
Ma'am.
Yes. Sorry about that. Well, that question had to do with the involvement of seller financing as part of the deal, and it can be, but it just has to be structured differently. One other thing I'll mention, one of the programs we offer is called the New Markets Tax Credit Program. Has anyone heard of that? New Markets Tax Credit Program? Okay. Great program. A little complicated on the back end, but we endure that heartburn so that you don't have to. But I'll give you some examples of how it's been used locally. The first requirement for this program is that the project must be in a severely economically distressed census tract. And we have some of those here in downtown Chattanooga. We have more out in the county, in the rural areas, but there are some here within the city limits. And for those of you who are local, you may know about and recognize the Tomorrow Building. It's on Patton Parkway. That's a project that we did, and it utilized the New Markets Tax Credit Program. The New Markets Tax Credit Program is last money into a project, typically 20% or less. So the project's building up its credit stack. It's built the stack up as high as it can go, but there's a shortage. Provided that project is in one of these qualified census tracts and it meets a community need, has a community benefit impact, the tax credits could be used to fill that gap. And as far as that goes, it's structured like a lot of other tax credit programs in that an agency like ours is allocated a tranche of tax credits through the Treasury Department, and we sell whatever amount is needed for that project to an investor. And the investor, in return for purchasing those credits, gets a credit of 39% over a period of 7 years. So that's the incentive to them to buy those credits, to be a part of this project. To the project owner, the advantage is that money is used to fill the gap so they can now start the project, get it underway. They will pay for that money, interest only for a period of 7 years. And then at the end of the 7 years, whatever the balance may be is typically forgiven, if you will. So that's immediate equity to the project. So there's an advantage to the investor in investing in these projects, and there's an advantage to the project in seeking these credits. I've told you how great it is, and it really is a good program. Since we've done that project I mentioned is within the city limits. Our bias now is to do those projects in rural, underserved areas, and we have a focus on projects that are providing job training, workforce training, healthcare, and manufacturing. Not that we wouldn't consider one that's not in one of those areas. We can act as a consultant if nothing else, but just want you to know that's where our focus is under that particular program. For those of you who have buildings in which you want to lease space to a business or nonprofit, again, that's ideal. And they can do, as Preston mentioned, under Bridge to Bankable, we can provide them with working capital. If they need to make leasehold improvements to that space, that's fine. If they need to buy inventory, equipment, whatever they need to get that business up and operating, that's fine. We have an option for them.
Absolutely. And I think it might be, I don't have the questions in front of me that we prepared, but some of the projects we've worked on in the past too, to kind of give you some visuals is, for instance, Little Coyote comes to mind. I know they just won a Michelin award, but that's a project we financed a few years ago. That was a leasehold improvement deal. And in that example, they were a startup restaurant. The owners do own some other well-known restaurants in the area, but our bank partner brought us into the deal because they didn't want that startup restaurant, quote unquote, on their books. So that's where we took the deal. They were still able to keep the operating relationship and the relationship with those business owners, and we were able to get them the financing they need. Another example, we just closed on a franchise in East Ridge, Play It Again Sports. That's another leasehold improvement and working capital SBA loan that we did. Some other projects that come to mind, Odd Stories, one we've done in the past. We did their equipment, a lot of their brewing tanks and other things. We didn't do their building, but just to kind of give you examples of what some of our loan products can offer these business owners. What are some other ones we talked about?
I can think of an example in Knoxville, Tennessee. 3 women, a mother, a daughter, and daughter-in-law. They operated a food truck, and they sold pretzels, really big pretzels, along with some other pastries. And anytime after they would announce their location for the truck, on Facebook, social media, they'd set up and within an hour or two, sold out, done for the day. They'd have to go back home, make more, go to the next location, sell out again. So they realized that that they had a proven concept, and the food truck just wasn't going to get them to where they needed to be. So they wanted a building to operate out of. And also in the meantime, they had learned to make ice cream, really good ice cream. And so they wanted to add that to their menu. So they approached a lender, a bank in Knoxville, and the bank said, yeah, you've got a proof of concept here. The items you're selling and making and selling from your food truck have a drawing, a clientele. That's good. But you've never had a brick and mortar before. So there's a little bit of risk here that we want to mitigate. And they mitigated that risk using the 504 loan program. So they did 50% of the project. However, as Preston mentioned, the 504 program will only get you into a building. You can't use it for working capital or, well, under some circumstances, some equipment. So, for example, if you do a hotel, you can do beds because you can't open your hotel if you don't have beds. But in this case, for the restaurant, no. The building, and that was it. So we came in with a companion loan to allow them to have working capital, to purchase inventory, put in the seating, the signage, all of that. So that's an example of where we were to help the bank to the extent they needed to be helped, and then we were able to fill the gap that they couldn't fill to get the business to where it needed to be in order to open its doors. So they purchased the building, They refurbished it. They put in all the equipment, and they've been doing great ever since.
I know a lot of people are scared about the small business loan, thinking it's going to take a lot longer, it can be challenging. Do you handle a lot of that so, it's not so challenging for business owners?
Yeah, absolutely, Grace. And that is something that is talked about in the marketplace. And that's kind of where we fit in, is we're able to alleviate a lot of those pain points. We serve as the middleman between the borrower and the bank, as well as the SBA. And that's what we, pride ourselves on, is, doing a great job, making sure the process is as smooth as possible for that business owner and banker. And yeah, that's why we're in the market, is to help alleviate those pain points. It does take time. I mean, just like with any type of loans, it's not, a 30-day process. We do gotta work our magic, and you gotta allow us the time to be able to help you get the funding you need. So it's not a quick process by any means. Yeah, if we had the full package, like business plan, tax returns, personal financial statements, all the good stuff, if we had the full package and I was ready to submit it to our credit team, you're looking at probably a 60-day turnaround time, and that's to go to the SBA to get that approval, as well as, closing, which typically takes about 30 days. So you're looking at 30 days for that approval, 30 days to close, assuming I have the package, say, today. But a big component of driving the process and making it kind of dragged out is a lot of times borrowers will piecemeal information. They might send me a business plan, but I'm still waiting on 24 tax returns, and that's what can really add time to the clock. So, yeah.
We do work with some resource partners here in Chattanooga. Those of you who lease space to businesses, I'm sure you look at your tenants' business plans and financials before you bring them on board. And these resource partners can be good for you too. And they are the Small Business Development Center. They're across the river on Cherokee Boulevard. And SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. These programs will help businesses, regardless if it's a startup or it's a seasoned business. They will help them develop their business plans, their financial projections, their marketing plans. Maybe you have a tenant in your building that has a product that they now want to export to Canada. They'll show them how to do that. So they're a great resource partner. So when some of these businesses come to us and they don't have what Preston needs and they're not sure how to pull it together, these are local resources that we can refer to, and they do a really good job. One thing to keep in mind, we're glad to talk with a business owner at any time. Glad to do that. We have those conversations daily. But we do ask that before getting serious about seeking a loan from us, that you first have had that conversation with a bank or a credit union to see if that conventional loan option is available to you. If it's not, then we can pick the ball up and run from there and hopefully get it across the finish line. But if you can go conventional, that's what you need to do.
Yeah, we don't want to compete with our bank partners. Make that very clear. They're our biggest referral source, so we're all on the same team and not trying to compete for business. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not a headset girl, but the other way. Okay. I guess I got it right now, huh? Guys, can you guys hear me? Okay, so thanks for coming. We had a great first Lunch and Learn with the Grace Frank Group. Our next one will be in February. We have some properties back here that do fall under this program, and there's brochures and some general information on it. These guys are great to get in touch with, and if you're thinking about something, like I have some marinas right now for sale, and I'm telling the buyers to get with you guys and really look at the cost segregation, because it could be really amazing about how the bottom line can change for so many of you when you're doing projects, whether it's multifamily, new construction. This is just an amazing new opportunity that's back on track at 100%. And if you combine that with the ability to get to the point of a 10% down, that's a game changer. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of business owners who've been wanting to do this but not sure how to do it. So we've got material over there. If you have any questions, we're available. Johnny Elvis works with my team on the commercial side. Eddie works on the investment side. But take some brochures if you'd like to set up a meeting, if you'd like us to send you more material. We've got some great products that are available and would work for this type of program. So thank you so much for coming. And thank you guys for taking your time to be here with us. We really appreciate it.